before he was emperor, before kings feared him, before Europe burned in his wars. He was just a small boy on a rocky island in the Mediterranean Sea. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. He was born on August 15th, 1769, on the island of Corsica. But Corsica was not peaceful. Just 1 year before his birth, France had taken control of the island. Many Corsicans did not accept French rule. They felt angry, divided, humiliated. Napoleon grew up in this atmosphere of tension. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer who tried to build connections with the new French rulers. His mother, Letizia Ramolino, was strong and disciplined. She raised her children strictly. She taught them endurance. Napoleon would later say, "I learned to suffer from my mother." He was not rich. He was not noble in the traditional sense. He was not powerful. But inside him, something restless was growing. The outsider. At only 9 years old, Napoleon left Corsica and went to France to study at military school. Imagine the loneliness. A small island boy surrounded by strangers. He spoke French with a heavy accent. Other students mocked him. They laughed at his name. They called him poor. They called him foreign. Napoleon did not respond with tears. He responded with silence. He became serious, reserved, cold. He spent long hours alone reading books about war, history, and great conquerors. He admired Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. He studied battles instead of playing games. While others enjoyed youth, he trained his mind. He believed knowledge was power, and one day, power would be his. The storm of revolution. In 1789, France exploded. The French Revolution changed everything. The people were starving. The government was corrupt. The king, Louis XVI, was seen as weak. Revolutionaries demanded equality. They destroyed the monarchy. They executed the king. France entered chaos. But chaos creates opportunity. Napoleon was now a young artillery officer. He understood cannons better than most commanders twice his age. In 1793, during the siege of Toulon, he made a bold plan to capture key positions. His strategy forced enemy ships to retreat. He was only 24 years old. He was promoted to general. His rise had begun. The Italian miracle. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the French army in Italy. The army was weak, hungry, poorly supplied. Morale was almost dead. Napoleon stood before them and spoke with fire. "Soldiers, you are naked and hungry. I will lead you to glory and wealth." It was not just words. It was confidence. He moved his army quickly, attacking divided enemy forces before they could unite. He defeated Austrian armies that were larger and better equipped. Battle after battle, victory after victory. His soldiers began to worship him. France celebrated him. Europe began to fear him. A new military genius had appeared. Egypt, ambition beyond Europe. In 1798, Napoleon aimed higher. He launched a campaign to Egypt. His goal was to weaken Britain and expand French influence. At first, he won victories on land. But the British Navy, led by Horatio Nelson, destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon was trapped. The campaign slowly failed. But Napoleon did something brilliant. He left Egypt quietly and returned to France before news of failure destroyed his image. He understood something powerful. Perception is power, and France was ready for a strong leader. Seizing destiny. France was unstable. The revolutionary government, called the Directory, was weak and corrupt. People were tired. They wanted order. They wanted strength. They wanted control. Napoleon saw his moment. In 1799, he led a political takeover known as the coup of 18 Brumaire. The government collapsed. Napoleon became first consul of France. He He was only 30 years old. The outsider from Corsica was now the most powerful man in France. But this was not enough for him. Not even close. He began centralizing authority, reforming laws, rebuilding the economy, strengthening the army. And inside him, the ambition that began in childhood was growing louder. He did not want to serve history. He wanted to shape it. The transformation from a mock schoolboy to a respected general to the ruler of France, all before the age of 35. But this was only the beginning. The real storms were still coming. Europe would unite against him. Kings would fear him. Empires would fall because of him. And one day, his ambition would carry him too far. The emperor and the conquest of Europe. Power is never satisfied. Once you taste it, you want more. By 1802, Napoleon Bonaparte was already the most powerful man in France. As first consul, he had stabilized the country after years of revolution and chaos. He rebuilt the economy. He improved education. He signed peace agreements. France was breathing again. But inside Napoleon, peace was not enough. He did not see himself as a temporary leader. He saw destiny. He saw greatness. He saw empire, the crown that shocked Europe. In 1804, Napoleon made a bold decision. He would become emperor. France had destroyed its monarchy during the French Revolution. Kings were symbols of oppression. And now, France would have an emperor again? Many were surprised. Many were confused. But Napoleon presented it differently. He said the empire would protect the revolution. He claimed it would defend equality and stability. On December 2nd, 1804, inside the great Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, the ceremony took place. The Pope himself traveled from Rome to crown him. But when the moment came, Napoleon did something unforgettable. He took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head. The message was clear. My power comes from me, not from God, not from tradition, not from old kings, from ambition, from ability, from force. Europe understood immediately. This was no ordinary ruler. This was a man rewriting history. Coalitions of fear. The kings of Europe were terrified. Austria feared him. Russia feared him. Britain feared him. Prussia feared him. They formed alliances, coalitions, to destroy him before he became unstoppable. But they underestimated him. Napoleon moved faster than any general before him. He believed in speed. He believed in surprise. He believed in breaking the enemy before they could unite. And in 1805, at the Battle of Austerlitz, he proved his genius. Austerlitz, the masterpiece. Facing the combined armies of Russia and Austria, Napoleon did something daring. He pretended to be weak. He allowed his enemies to think he was afraid. He even abandoned high ground to make them believe they had the advantage. It was a trap. When the enemy attacked what they believed was his weak center, Napoleon launched a powerful counterattack. His troops crushed the middle of the Allied army. The enemy lines collapsed. Thousands were killed or captured. It became known as the Battle of the Three Emperors. And it was Napoleon's greatest victory. Europe trembled. The Holy Roman Empire dissolved shortly after. France stood dominant. Napoleon was now the most powerful man on the continent. Reshaping Europe. Napoleon did not just win battles. He redesigned Europe. He removed old rulers. He placed his brothers and allies on foreign thrones. He created new kingdoms. He spread French influence across Italy, Germany, Spain, and beyond. He introduced reforms wherever he ruled. One of his most lasting achievements was the Napoleonic Code, a legal system that promoted equality before the law, protected property rights, and ended feudal privileges. Even today, many countries use legal systems inspired by it. But conquest creates resistance. And the more territory he controlled, the more enemies he made. The war with Britain. One enemy never fell. Britain. Napoleon could defeat armies on land, but he could not defeat the British Navy at sea. After losing naval power earlier, he understood that invading Britain directly was nearly impossible. So he chose another weapon: economic warfare. He created the Continental System, an attempt to block British trade with Europe. He ordered European nations to stop trading with Britain. His goal was simple: strangle Britain economically. But this strategy hurt Europe too. Smuggling increased. Allies grew unhappy. Some nations secretly disobeyed him. The empire was growing large and difficult to control. Spain, the beginning of trouble. In 1808, Napoleon made a decision that would slowly weaken him. He invaded Spain. He removed the Spanish king and placed his brother Joseph on the throne. He believed it would be easy. He was wrong. The Spanish people resisted fiercely. Guerrilla warfare began. Small groups attacked French soldiers unexpectedly. It became a long, brutal conflict. For the first time, Napoleon faced a war he could not easily control. France was bleeding resources. Soldiers were dying far from home. The empire was expanding, but cracks were forming. Pride before the fall. At his peak, Napoleon controlled most of continental Europe. He was admired by many, feared by all, but power changes perspective. He began believing he could not fail. He trusted his instinct more than advice. He believed speed and courage could solve everything. History often shows us a pattern. When leaders feel unstoppable, they make their biggest mistakes. And for Napoleon, that mistake would come from the East. Russia, the height of glory. By 1810, Napoleon married Marie-Louise of Austria, strengthening political alliances. He now had a son, the King of Rome. He had an empire, a dynasty, a legacy. The boy from Corsica had achieved what seemed impossible. But ambition rarely stops at enough. And soon, Europe would witness the beginning of his decline. Because empires built on war must continue fighting. And eventually, they fight battles too large to win. The Russian disaster and the beginning of the end. By 1811, Napoleon Bonaparte stood at the height of his power. He controlled most of Europe. Kings answered to him. Armies feared him. But one nation refused to fully obey. Russia. Tsar Alexander I of Russia had once been Napoleon's ally. After their meeting in 1807, they signed peace agreements and promised cooperation. But peace built on fear is fragile. Russia began ignoring Napoleon's continental system, the economic blockade against Britain. Trade slowly reopened. Trust disappeared. Napoleon felt betrayed. And when powerful men feel betrayed, they do not forgive easily. They punish. The largest army Europe had ever seen. In June 1812, Napoleon gathered what became known as the Grande Armée. Over 600,000 soldiers. French troops, Polish troops, German troops, Italian troops, an army from across Europe. It was the largest military force the continent had ever seen. Napoleon believed this show of strength would force Russia into quick surrender. He expected one decisive battle, one powerful victory, one moment of submission. But Russia had other plans. The silent enemy. Instead of facing Napoleon directly, Russian forces retreated. They moved deeper into their own land. And as they moved, they destroyed everything behind them. Fields were burned. Villages were emptied. Food supplies were ruined. This strategy is called scorched earth. The goal was simple: starve the enemy. The French army marched forward. Day after day, week after week, through heat, through dust, through through exhaustion, but there was little food, little water, little rest. Disease began spreading. Horses died. Supplies weakened. Still, Napoleon pressed forward. He believed Moscow would end the war. The Battle of Borodino. Finally, in September 1812, the two armies clashed at the Battle of Borodino. It was brutal, one of the bloodiest single-day battles of the era. Cannons roared. Smoke covered the sky. Tens of thousands fell. Napoleon technically won, but it was not the decisive victory he expected. The Russian army retreated again. Still alive. Still unbroken. Moscow, the empty prize. Napoleon entered Moscow, but the city was silent. Empty. Abandoned. Soon after, fires began spreading across the city. Most of Moscow burned. Napoleon waited for Tsar Alexander to surrender. He waited days, then weeks. No message came. No surrender arrived. Winter approached, and the temperature began to fall. Napoleon had marched too far, too deep, too late. The winter of death. In October, Napoleon made the decision to retreat. It was already too late. The Russian winter showed no mercy. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Soldiers lacked warm clothing. Food ran out. Horses collapsed in the snow. Men froze during the night. Others starved. Russian forces attacked from a distance, harassing the retreating army. The once mighty Grande Army turned into a broken line of desperate survivors. From over 600,000 soldiers, fewer than 100,000 returned. The rest were dead, captured, or lost forever in the snow. The legend of invincibility had shattered. Europe saw something it had never seen before. Napoleon vulnerable. Europe strikes back. When news spread of the disaster, former allies turned against him. Prussia revolted. Austria hesitated. Britain strengthened coalitions. A new alliance formed, determined to destroy Napoleon once and for all. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, known as the Battle of Nations, Napoleon faced combined forces from multiple European powers. This time, numbers overwhelmed genius. He was defeated. France was invaded. In 1814, Allied forces entered Paris. The emperor who once ruled Europe now faced the end. The first exile. Napoleon was forced to abdicate. He was sent into exile on the island of Elba, a small island off the coast of Italy. He was given control of the island, but stripped of his empire. For a man who once commanded millions, it was a dramatic fall. But even in exile, Napoleon remained restless. He studied politics. He watched France. He waited. And when he sensed weakness in the new French government, he made one of the boldest moves in history. He escaped. The beginning of the end. In February 1815, Napoleon left Elba and returned to France. Soldiers were sent to arrest him. But something extraordinary happened. When he faced them, he stepped forward and said, "If any of you will shoot your emperor, here I am." No one fired. Instead, they joined him. He marched toward Paris. And once again, he took control without firing a single shot. This period is known as the 100 Days. But Europe would not allow a second rise. They prepared for war. And this time, they would finish it. Waterloo, final exile, and the death of a legend. In March 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte stood once again in Paris. The emperor had returned. The people cheered. The army followed him. For a brief moment, it seemed like destiny had forgiven him. This period became known as the 100 Days. But Europe was not celebrating. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia immediately formed another coalition. They did not negotiate. They did not hesitate. They decided Napoleon must be defeated permanently. The road to Waterloo. Napoleon understood something important. If he waited, the Allied armies would unite and overwhelm France. So he chose speed. He would strike first. He moved his forces into Belgium to defeat the British and Prussian armies before they could combine. His main opponent was the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, a calm, disciplined British commander. Supporting Wellington was the Prussian general, Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. Napoleon's plan was simple: defeat them separately, win quickly, force peace. But fate had other plans. June 18th, 1815, Waterloo. The battlefield was near a small village called Waterloo. Rain had fallen heavily the night before. The ground was muddy. Artillery movement was slow. Napoleon delayed his attack, waiting for the ground to dry. That delay would prove costly. The battle began late in the morning. French forces attacked fiercely. Wave after wave of soldiers pushed against Wellington's defensive positions. Cannons roared. Smoke covered the fields. Thousands fell. At first, it seemed Napoleon might succeed. But Wellington held his ground. His troops stood firm behind defensive lines. And then, in the late afternoon, Blücher's Prussian army arrived. Fresh troops, new energy, additional pressure. Napoleon's forces were now outnumbered. The battlefield turned chaotic. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's most elite soldiers, made a final desperate advance. They had never been defeated before, but this time they were pushed back. When the Guard retreated, panic spread through the French army. Confidence collapsed. The line broke. Waterloo was lost. The final fall. This defeat was different from all others. There would be no recovery, no second return. Napoleon returned to Paris, but support was gone. He abdicated for the second time. This time, the Allies made sure he could never return. He was exiled to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic Ocean. Far from Europe, far from politics, far from power. It was a prison surrounded by ocean. No escape possible. St. Helena, the last years. On St. Helena, Napoleon lived under British supervision. The once mighty emperor now walked limited paths. He argued with his guards. He wrote memoirs. He spoke about his victories. He defended his decisions. He shaped his own story. Even in exile, he controlled the narrative. He wanted history to remember him as a hero, not a tyrant. As a genius, not a failure. But isolation is heavy. The climate was harsh. The boredom was endless. The man who once commanded Europe now commanded only memories. On May 5th, 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died at the age of 51. The official cause was likely stomach cancer. He died far from France, far from the battlefield, far from glory. But legends do not die quietly. The return of the body. Years later, in 1840, France brought his body back to Paris. Thousands gathered in silence and respect. He was buried in Les Invalides, a grand tomb for a grand life. Even those who once fought him could not deny his impact. The man behind the myth. So how should history judge him? He was a military genius. His strategies are still studied in military academies. He created the Napoleonic Code, influencing modern legal systems worldwide. He promoted merit over noble birth. He modernized France, but he also caused years of devastating war. Millions died in battles across Europe. Families were destroyed. Nations were shaken. He believed deeply in destiny, perhaps too deeply. Napoleon once said, "Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever." He chose glory, and he paid the price. The legend that remains, from a mocked Corsican schoolboy, to emperor of France, to ruler of much of Europe, to prisoner on a distant island. His life feels almost unbelievable, but it is real. It teaches us something powerful. Ambition can lift a person higher than imagination, but without limits, it can also bring them down. Even today, more than 2 centuries later, The name Napoleon still echoes in history, not just as a conqueror, not just as a ruler, but as a symbol of human ambition at its greatest and at its most dangerous. If you enjoyed this epic journey through history, subscribe for more powerful stories told in simple English. Because history is not just about the past. It is about understanding ambition, power, and the choices that shape the world. And no story shows that better than Napoleon Bonaparte.